Okay, so hello everyone. In this exercise, we are going to explore texture. We are going to do things with actually producing texture before adding some paint on top of it. So we're going to have a bit of exploration on that. We're also going to look on creation of the texture with your brushes and also with other equipment. I've prepared some little pieces of cardboard for you so you can play with that as well. As you can see, I've got A2 paper here in front of me. I've divided it into 9 pieces. So by the time you finish this exercise, you should have 9 different experiments that you're going to do on your paper. You will need some paint. I advise you to use a paint that is in a lighter color because it's going to be easier to photograph than a dark color. For your painting experiment, makes no difference. Also, if you want to add some color experimentations, go for it. But for photographing lighter, it's going to be easier. Okay, so let's start with the tasks that are going to take a bit of a time to dry. So some of your experiments should include a pre-made texture. I've got some white glue. Any liquid glue is going to be okay. PVA glue or school glue is great. I've just put some of it into my cup. I've put depth around 1 inch because I'm going to do 3 different elements with it. But at the moment, this glue is very, very thick. So it would make it difficult for me to use it. Okay, so I need to dilute it a bit. So I'm going to add a small amount of water, okay, and just change the consistency of my glue. So that's the first thing that you're going to start with. Add less water than you think that you need first, okay, because it's easy to add a tiny bit more later. Okay, you can see that my glue is getting a bit better now. What you want a consistency of like runny yogurt, a bit thicker than Laban. Okay, so that's a bit better, but I still think it is a bit too thick, so I'm going to add a dash more. And you need to make sure that you incorporated the water into your glue. All right. Okay, so first we're going to add some texture. You can use anything that you want. You can use some tissue, some tissue paper and some cleaning tissues. You could use scraps of paper, whatever comes to your mind. Okay. Okay. Start by creating a sticky surface. And you want to be generous with your glue, but you don't want your page to swim in the glue, if that makes sense. So it's a generous layer, but you don't want to have too much of it. Okay? And then add whatever surface and materials you would like to add. Thin fabric will work as well. Newspapers will work. So I've got my tissue now. If I would leave it like that, my paint would not stick to it properly. And also I've got the pockets of the tissue that are just not going to be structurally sound. So the next thing I need to do is I need to cover now this tissue. You will need to start with this part of exercise simply because it will take around an hour for it to dry, depending how much glue you're going to add. Okay, and you can see that I'm trying to take away any pockets of air and make sure that my tissue is nice and flat. Okay, make sense? Okay, so 3 of your experiments should include some sort of added texture before you start painting. I'm going to move this piece, put it away. So here you've got one that I've done on Thursday, and you can see I've created 3 elements here. So that's exactly the same as I've done previously, just with a different tissue. I've took some paper and just stick it flat here, so there is a texture, but it's a bit less. And I've created like much more bumpy area. Okay, here is the one that a TA done. So you can see very different approach. She decided to use some other material as well. So here she added a pastel to create almost like this rough surface, and some leftover shavings from the color crayon as well. So you can experiment with your backgrounds, whichever area you want. I think having just the one color is going to be a bit boring, so I'm going to prepare myself a different color as well. Okay, so while your glue parts are drying, okay, put it in the position that is comfortable for you, and I want you to start experimenting with the thicker layers of paint. So far, when we've done the realistic paintings, most of our paint was kind of a thin layer, okay, and then maybe we've added another layer or two on the top, okay, but I'm interested in how you're going to treat the texture. So first, starting with the back and with your brush, try to think about using a very decent amount of paint. As you can see, I'm playing now with two colors, and try to see what will happen if you use a generous amount of it. Obviously, if you're painting in that time, in that way, the time that you need for your paint to dry is going to be massively longer. Okay, so if you're working with the thin layer, probably after 10-15 minutes you can start painting on top of it, because it dry here you will need to wait longer. Okay, what else you can do with your brush? Well, instead of doing the long marks, you could use the top of it and start thinking, how would that texture behave if I'm just dabbing my paint? Okay, I can try my really tall dabs. I can try a bit of thinner dabs. Okay, I can try different types of the textures and lines. So basically what you're trying to do, you're trying to explore different ways of using your tool. Another thing to consider for you is to creating a thick layer of the paint. Okay, and then using the other side of the brush and creating, scrubbing your paint. This is called scruffy top. So let's move to a different type of tool. So I'm going to take a piece of card here, but obviously you could be creative with it. You could put a painting knife. It could be a fork, a spoon, anything like that. Let's just see how this paint is going to behave when we're using a different tool. So you can see that the marks immediately become a bit different, a bit more expressive, okay? Because your palette knife or your piece of card, it's going to behave differently, yeah? Any questions about what's happening? Okay, so obviously, play with the amount of paint. So I'm going to do a bit thinner texture here. You can play with, again, a different application of your paint. You can play with using the sides and creating lines. Okay. Make sense? All righty. So explore, and you can use different things for your work. Let's just be a bit more experimental. I'm going to grab this cup. I've actually never done that before. But let's just see what kind of marks I can do if I would use a very different type of tool. Okay? So different equipment will allow you a very different approach. All right? That part makes sense? I want you to be as expressive as possible. Go for try and error. Come up with things that you think that might not work. Come up with things that you think it will work. Try to use lighter colors so it's easier to photograph later on. Okay? So let's come back to our ready textures. Okay? So they are dry. They're probably going to take an hour to dry. And let's see how the paint now will behave on top of them. Okay, so first I'm going to try a thin layer. I really like that actually. Then I'm going to try a thicker layer. Can you see that you've got a very different behavior depending on how much paint you use it? You can also experiment with two different paints. So you could be like, okay, and what if I will add some paints on the ridges? What if I will let it dry and then add a different paint on top of it? So I could approach it from the stance of just having semi-dry brush and do something on top. I actually really like that. I can see if I would paint that first and then use a semi-dry brush, I could create some nice textures. Okay. In the background here, so we've got a very flat put paper. It doesn't give me much texture, it gives me some. So that might be interesting in my design. Or maybe not. Okay. You are trying to find the elements of creating texture that potentially could work for your series of abstract 6 pieces. Note here, I want you to work pretty quick. Okay, I don't want you to create the best pieces, the nicely organized, work like I did. Okay, messy. It's not a point about making it all perfect, it's a point about exploring different types of marks. You're going to have 9 boxes, but you can do what I did. You can actually change your approach in one box to create more interesting results. Alrighty? Okay, any questions? Not the same, so you're not copying yourself, but you need to create an artwork that is connected. So if you look on the project brief, there are 3 pieces there as an example. So you can see that they've got a similar color, the similar texture, but they're not exactly the same. So as long as they're connected and you could put them together as a piece of 6 and you know that this is the same artist, you can vary. The connection that you're going to create depends from you. It might be a color, it might be a texture and different color. It might be a composition that it's similar. Okay, so you've got quite a lot of freedom in this piece. When I'm going to grade your final pieces, the key element is going to be how well you can put colors together. So are they clashing or they are connected? Is the composition interesting? And are you experimentative? Yeah, are you trying to think outside of the box? That was a very good question. Any more questions? Alrighty, grab some paper and enjoy. Thank you.